Tell me, get it, it's okay.
which prevent, rescues, and restores victims of domestic and minor sex trafficking, was recognized by the Dallas Homeland Security Investigations as a most valued partner in this battle to save American children. We are very honored to have Lindsay Speed, Director of Programs, with us today. Lindsay, and go forward. Got the mic.
Well, thank you so much. Can you guys hear me?
Nope.
A little bit.
There we go. How are you all?
Good.
Good. I'm so honored to be here with you today. I am driving in from Dallas, so it's my first time in San Angelo. I like it so far. All you all seem like great people, so thanks for having me. Just a little bit about me before I get started so you kind of understand where I'm coming from. I've been with Traffic 911 for the past 5 years. We were just founded in 2009. So almost since the beginning, I've been with Traffic 911, and I am an Aggie graduate and worked in the corporate world in corporate marketing for about 6 or 7 years. And a friend of a friend, you know, it's always these interesting stories. A friend of a friend had told me about Traffic 911 and the work that they do, and said, hey, would you come to coffee with me and meet this lady? So I just said, you know, okay. And I had the coffee at Starbucks and meet someone who really, what I didn't know would change my life and really open my eyes on something that I hadn't heard of much before, other than the issue overseas, which is human trafficking and specifically sex trafficking. And so after that, it was one of those things where I was working a corporate job and I had to do something. I remember going home that night thinking, I can't go back to not knowing this information. You know, I can't live like I didn't know that this existed. And so I began volunteering. I volunteered for about 3 years with the organization and continued to work with, in the corporate world and volunteer my time. And about 3.5 years ago, I got to come on full-time and have done a little bit of everything. We have a pretty small staff and about 500 volunteers who work across Texas, working in our goal is to free youth from sex trafficking. So we specifically focus on the issue here domestically, and really even more specifically here in Texas. And so I want to share a story with you, and I'll continue to share a little bit about what we do as we go on. But how many of you have seen the movie Taken? Have you seen that movie Taken? Yeah. I think when people hear of human trafficking, they automatically maybe think of Thailand or somewhere overseas, Cambodia, or this is just an overseas problem, which we know it is. And then there's movies Taken that come out, and it was really great at raising awareness of this issue, but it still almost painted the picture like it's not an issue here. You know, it was an American girl, she goes overseas, and she was sold into sex trafficking over there. So it's still, and then she has this, you know, big man, dad, Liam Neeson saving her. But it still paints this picture as it may not be an issue here in the United States. And so I want to just share with you a few of the different stories of the girls that we've worked with, and I'll start off by sharing about a girl named Emily. It was one of the first victims that we worked with up in the North Texas area, and 13 years old at the time, from middle school. She was in middle school and had everything going for her. I mean, just both parents in the home. They were a church-going family. She was an honors student, competition gymnast, you know, just all the boxes checked off as far as not a high-risk type of youth, right? But one week, her and her parents were having a rough week, and she got grounded because she was on the phone talking to the boy that her parents didn't want her to talk to. And so she got grounded, and one day after school, she convinced them to let her stay after to the middle school basketball game. So she's at the middle school basketball game, sitting in the bleachers, talking with some of her friends, just ranting on her parents. You know, I am so mad at them. I do all of this good stuff. And this was always her argument with her parents. And she said, I do all of this good stuff. All I want to do is get a tattoo, because every 13-year-old needs a tattoo, right? I mean, and so obviously they were like, no. So she's talking to her friends in the bleachers, just going off on them. Well, a couple rows up were these two really good-looking, young 20-something guys. The girls had told us they had some tattoos and overheard their conversation. So long story short, she gets in a discussion with one of them down at the concession stand there at her middle school, and one of the guys was like, so what's up with your parents? You know, I heard you talking about that. what's going on? And so this young 13-year-old girl just pours her story out to this good-looking young guy who's interested in her, and she tells him all of her woes, and he listens, which is really important. You know, sometimes teenagers just need some attention. But he listens, and she tells him about the tattoo. And he says, well, it just so happens that me and my buddy, we work at a tattoo shop right down the street. He's like, he lifted up her hair, he said, we could get you a tattoo right here behind your hair. Your parents might not even see it. Best part about it is we could be back before the game's over because it's just right down the street. So 13-year-old having a rough week with her parents. She got in the car with them on that day, and she told us later, you know, as soon as she got in the car, she knew something wasn't right. It's just something wasn't right. And so it's a tough subject, but what happened with her was they took her to a hotel, sexually assaulted her, and then began to sell her for sex. And they sold her for 10 days to more men than she can remember, with only NyQuil to get her through. And honestly, she really has a God story on how she got out, because I'll tell you, I mean, we work with over 180 girls and 2 boys here in Texas, victims, and no other story is like this. But because she was a good kid from a good home, good family, blonde hair, blue eyes, everyone's looking for her. You know, there's an Amber Alert out on her. Her face is all over the news, and her pimp had taken her up to Oklahoma for a couple days, come back down to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and popped on the news and saw her face. And he ends up just kind of flipping out and dropping her off at a convenience store. This is how she ends up back at her parents' doorstep, really traumatized, as you can imagine. And that's where we came in. The law enforcement had reached out to us there. This was in Irving, Texas, and said, hey, traffic 911 can help you. And so what we try to do is help the victim get services. And I do 4 to 8 hour first responder trainings with law enforcement stuff, so I can talk forever, so I'm going to try to condense down what I know for you guys today. But what we do is we attempt to get her services, right, and help her parents understand what has really happened, and that this needs to be a long-term restoration, trauma-informed therapy for this girl. Well, really, her parents just wanted to go back to normal life, you know, and so after a couple sessions with the counselor that we did not recommend, just kind of a run-of-the-mill child advocate counselor, the counselor just told her to readjust. And so they ended up putting her back into school, where she is, long story short, now committed a crime that got her 7 years in jail, and she's on a 7-year sentence now. And so I hate to share a story that ends bad, but I have to be real with you, because a lot of these stories don't end well, and I'll share with you some that do. But Emily is our case that this can happen to anyone. I mean, we hear stories that span the horizon as far as types of youth who get lured or forced into this. But one of the things that Traffic 911 we're really passionate about is partnering with law enforcement. And so because we're working with youth victims of sex trafficking, we're not going to go take a kid off the street. That would be kidnapping. We really work closely with law enforcement. Homeland Security in the North Texas area works the majority of our cases. And so we feed leads to them from the different victims that we work with, and they go out and arrest the pimps, traffickers, and buyers. And that's where we see true justice. It's one thing to help a youth get off the street or get out of the life of sex trafficking. It's another thing for them to sleep at night knowing that their perpetrator, their trafficker, is not out on the street doing this to someone else, right? And so we see those two going hand in hand. Not only getting her help, but also getting the perpetrators off the street. So that's where we partner really closely with law enforcement all across Texas. Homeland Security, FBI, local law enforcement, the Attorney General's office works a lot of our cases, and really the partnerships together is what makes this work. So just to get everyone on the same page with what I'm talking about, is in case you don't know, I'm sure maybe you've seen it a lot in the news lately, because it's become to be more of a hot button issue with human trafficking. But specifically when I'm talking about sex trafficking, I'm talking about an exchange of any sex act for anything of value. So that can actually be, it's a lot broader term than a lot of people realize. Anything of value can be things other than money. It can be in exchange for a place to stay. It can be in exchange for food, in exchange for drugs. We had one of our girls was, her parents were involved in the Mexican cartel. She's from a border town here in Texas, and her mom sold her to the cartel for a pickup truck. So technically, right, the pickup truck is the value, so that would be trafficking as well. So these stories, they're really interesting, but there's really some great work being done, and we have worked with over 180 victims, and where we come across them with Traffic 911 is in the juvenile detention centers. And so that's where we work closely with Fred's brother, who just retired, Bob Contreras. He is over with the Texas Juvenile Justice Department, and our team is in about 14 different county facilities across Texas. We go in with a program called TRAPS, and what we do is we work with young people and we teach them a prevention message on how to keep themselves safe, because so many youth are getting trapped in this. Does that make sense? So that's one of the places that we're coming across these youth, is they're getting picked up on drug charges, runaways, truancy, something like that, and they get put in a juvenile facility, and they haven't really been taught to look under the surface to figure out, why are they really in there? Or why are they on drugs? Why are they truant? Why are they runaways? And so that's what our team does, is they go in, and through our program, these young people begin to open up to us and say, this is happening to me. And so that's how we then feed leads to law enforcement, which results in helping that girl out, right, and getting her out of the system, hopefully, and on the road to recovery. So a few stats I'll share with you, because a lot of people want to know, what is the breadth of this problem right here in the United States? We know this is an issue overseas, and in no way do I want to minimize that this is a fact, or this is an issue across the globe. We're talking globally, 27 million slaves in the world today, more than at any other time in history. A child is sold every 2 minutes across the globe. But what a lot of people don't know is that here in the United States, it's estimated that about between 100 and 300,000 of our own kids are sold right here within our own borders. And so it's not people, right, being taken out of our country, not people being brought in. That's a whole nother about 14,000 average annually that are brought in to be sold. But we're talking about our own American citizens, 18 and under, who are being sold here within the border. So it's a much larger issue, I think, than a lot of people realize. They want to know, how is this happening? And we don't see it. You know, and I'll talk about that as we go on, maybe some of the, why is this happening, as we say, in plain sight. It's right under our noses, and a lot of times we don't see it. Well, here in the United States, the average age of entry is into sex trafficking is only 12 or 13 years old. So we're talking about quite a young age that they're recruited on average. So we can see older, we can see younger. So I would love to make this actually interactive. Why do you think 12 or 13? Give me a few reasons you think.
Because they're not aware of what's going on.
Yeah, they're vulnerable because they don't know.
They're too trusting.
Too trusting.
They're innocent.
They're innocent. Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about young kids, they're vulnerable just because of their age. And so we have to recognize the vulnerability plays a huge role in the age. The other factor that we prefer to ignore, unfortunately, is the fact that pimps wouldn't be supplying something that there wasn't a demand for, right? So at the end of the day, this is a supply and demand issue. The pimps, the traffickers, they're the third party, they're the middleman. They are making the deal and profiting off of the sale to buyers. If there weren't a demand for young people, then pimps wouldn't have any reason to supply. So it's hard to accept, but the fact is that there is a demand for younger and younger youth, and unfortunately that is definitely disturbing. And once they are lured or forced in for whatever reason, studies are showing that the average life expectancy of a victim of sex trafficking is only 7 years. So they're not living very long. And this study actually showed it was a mortality rate, not that they had aged out of the system or aged out of the life where they weren't desirable anymore. This was that if they didn't get out of what's termed the life within 7 years, they were dead. And so again, throw out some reasons. Why are they only living 7 years?
Suicide.
Suicide, for sure. What else?
Drugs.
STDs. Yeah, disease, drugs, huge. They're committing suicide, they're getting killed. There's a lot of brutality involved, unfortunately. And so add all those right together and you can understand why they're not living very long. This is one of the reasons that Traffic 911 was named what we are. It's not that we work with 911, even though, sir, I'm glad that you've served so long. We don't work necessarily with Traffic 911, But it's our constant reminder of that this is an emergency issue, right? If these young people are only living 7 years, this is an emergency issue. We have to address this now. We can't wait 15 years for a law to pass. And I will say, on the federal side, it wasn't until the year 2000 that our federal government even recognized this is an issue here in the United States, that this is affecting victims here. Addressed international victims, right, than our own children or our own domestic victims, women or children for this. And so we've got a long way to go as far as laws. I won't go into a whole bunch of today. I know maybe many of you are interested, and I have my card. I know someone was going to pass it out. So email me, because the 84th legislative session that we just got out of passed some really great new laws. We're a part of the Attorney General's task force for human trafficking prevention, who, because we're on the front lines, they listen to us and they say, hey, what laws do we need in place? And luckily our governor and the team up there or down there in Austin has done a good job at listening to the people on the front lines to address some of these laws that need to take place. So,
Lindsay?
yeah, go ahead.
I'm trying to be interactive here.
Please, please.
What are they prosecuting the pimp on if he's not having sexual relations with the young 13-year-old? How are they putting him in jail?
That's a good question. Compelling prostitution is one of the popular ones we see. Compelling prostitution here in Texas typically carries around a 15-year sentence. They can usually get them on child pornography as well, because they're usually taking pictures of them and posting them on the internet. A lot of them are having sex with their victims as well, so you can get them on the sexual assault of a minor as well. So there is quite a long list of things, because it's such a, a lot of times drugs is involved, so they'll get them on that, or the gang members, and so there's things that go along with that. So, but compelling prostitution is the one we get the most, because they are forcing these minors into having sex with the customers. So, good. That's a really good question. The National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is run up in DC. Last year they received over 24,000 calls here in the United States. A very well-known hotline. Here's some of the trends that they were seeing, that they produce this report each year to see, okay, out of the cases, here's what trends we're seeing. And they begin to see, we've begun to see a lot of gang activity, where gangs are even forming networks and ties together to go into sex trafficking because it is so lucrative. We're talking, this is the second largest criminal activity in the world, fastest growing. When we talk to youth, we tell them, if you're a drug dealer, you have a drug, you sell it once and your commodity's done. You sell a human being, you have a reusable commodity, and that's why this is so lucrative. And so these guys are making, pimps and here in the United States are making average $200,000 a year per girl or per boy in their stable, as they say. So an average number of victims that a pimp has here in the United States is about 4 to 5. And so lots of tax-free, right, illegal money that they are gaining off of this. And so gangs is one of the trends they're seeing. Social media, we have a whole presentation that goes into talking about social media when it comes to our youth, because this is one of the prime ways that kids are lured in, is through social media. Someone they met online, through Facebook, through Instagram, Twitter. We show all of these different, different logos and different apps, and we talk to people about how to keep themselves safe on there, how to not, when we're talking to young people, not friend everyone that they think they know. And what's happening is these perpetrators are online building relationships and maybe even acting like someone who they think they know, or a boyfriend, or something like that, and beginning to gain that trust that way, and then it ends up they meet somewhere, right, and it goes from there. And so we see social media. One of our girls, I'll tell you real quick that one of our girls we had was from, anyone familiar with Allen, Texas? It's north of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, a higher household income city, and so you wouldn't expect to see a victim come out of that city. But we had a girl who was 15 at the time, and from Allen, Texas, was just having a rough time at home, wanted to run away. She was on a social media site and met another girl, and they were just talking, kind of buddy-buddy, and pretty quickly she told this girl, I just want to get out of here. I hate my mom. And so within 45 minutes, this girl had showed up at her house to pick her up. I can give you a place to live. You can stay with me for a while, that kind of thing. And so in the back seat, though, was a man named William Jacobs. He is out of Denton County, and he's the one who ended up selling them, or selling her. The other girl was actually the recruiter. She ended up being sentenced as well, but they sold her in 6 states in 30 days. So he took her across this, across the network of towns and cities where demand is. You see movement involved a lot in trafficking. Not that there has to be movement, but because they're going to the next big demand. Have you ever heard that Super Bowls are common high demand times? Sporting events, large conferences, conventions, those are high demand areas. So our girls will tell us that they'll be taken right to the next big demand place where they're going to make the money. So we'll see the movement involved a lot in that. Yes, go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish your thought, I'm sorry.
Oh, that was it. I just talked up.
I was just going to ask, are they doing anything in the high schools and the junior high schools to educate these young girls about this danger?
Yeah, that's a good question. Not enough. Not enough. I wish I could say it's mandatory. You know, so we were working with the AG's task force on some new laws. What they put in place last session was that at least the teachers are now being not mandatory, but TDA has provided human trafficking training that covers this, so that at least the teachers will be educated, right, on this issue. But the next step, we hope, is to get it into the schools. So what our agency is doing is we do bring our youth program into schools and really wherever the doors open. Of course, right now, we're not quite in San Angelo yet, but we could train up some volunteers if anyone wants to bring our program down here, and we'll go into health classes, history classes, because right, it connects to slavery, and talk about this issue and teach our youth. But by and large, the answer is no. But we do see that beginning to change because of some of the laws that are beginning to get in place to at least begin to make educator training mandatory. And then our hopes is the next step will be that the students will, it will be a course that is required for them to take because it's so important. Anyone else on that? Yeah, go ahead.
2 questions.
Sure.
First one, approximately, and I know this would be a guess on your part, approximately how many young girls are involved in this in Texas?
Oh, that's a tough question. There are not any credible sources out there that tell us the exact number.
Your best guess.
So, oh goodness, my best guess. Well, our small agency has worked with over 180. I mean, I'm being filmed, so I don't know if I can make a guess. I mean, definitely between 5 and 10,000, I would say.
Pardon?
Between 5 and 10,000 for sure.
5 and 10,000?
I mean, that's some estimates that I've heard come across that aren't verified studies, but out of what they're seeing in some of the main, and the way, this is one of my next trends actually, so we can go into it. The way that you can sort of count, oh, you have a second question, is through Backpage.com. Has anyone heard of Backpage.com? Anyone? Show of hands. All right, we've got one. All right, Backpage.com, just like a Craigslist, right? If you've heard of Craigslist, you can go on Backpage, buy a couch, sell a car, that type of thing. There's a category called escorts, and that's where these ads live. And that's where we can get a gauge of, because that's where these girls are being sold. No longer is it on a street corner as much. The pimps are putting the ads up for the girls on websites, and then the Johns will go on there, pick their person, and meet up with them. And so we can kind of see, you can kind of gauge activity through the ads that you see online in your area, which there are definitely ads from this area, so there is a problem here in case you didn't know. Second question.
Second question is, approximately how many new recruits do they get per year?
I can't say that. I don't know. I will get back to you though if I can find a study on that, and I'll take your information down. New recruits per year here in Texas?
Yes.
Gosh, there's a pretty big turnover, as you heard, because of the mortality rate, because they're getting
the last
out.
7 years. If that's
Sure.
the lifespan of the
Sure, I see where you're going with this. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. There is still a lot of studies lacking. And let me tell you, the University of Texas is doing some really great research on this, as well as Texas Christian University up in Fort Worth. We work really closely with Dr. Vanessa Boucher there, and they're doing some research to try to study this, because this is the issue right here. But I think I got into some stats already. I always usually give a disclaimer that says, these are just statistics. I'm telling you, so much is still uncovered and still hidden. And it is really hard to get your hand around what we think we're dealing with, because so much of it is hidden. And because as it's uncovered every day, the more we're seeing. I mean, Homeland Security, as you know, they deal with a bunch of different issues, but their human trafficking group has decided, at least in the North Texas area, to say, we're focusing on domestic minors because this is an issue we want to address. So it's interesting to hear that from the top, from the federal government, they're saying, this is such a big issue, we want a team specifically focused on this one area. So yeah.
How many of these recruits come from single-family households?
Good question. A lot. I would say 80%.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. And then that goes into the high-risk characteristics. When we're talking about, a lot of people want to know, who are these victims? You know, how do you become a victim? Who are the high-risk types of character? We always stress, look, it can be anyone. I told you about the story of Emily earlier. She did not fit any high-risk profile, right? And she still became a victim, because when we're talking about young people, we're talking about vulnerability. But we do see high-risk characteristics, and that is things such as single-family, single-parent households. If there's any prior physical or sexual abuse, it's estimated that between 70 to 90% of victims of sex trafficking had previous physical or sexual abuse in their past. And so, right, you hear about that term, re-victimization. We see that a lot with these types of victims. If there's an unstable home life, parent-child conflict, mental illness can be a high-risk characteristic. Any involvement with foster care systems, CPS, makes them more at a risk. We see, again, a very high percentage of victims who have come through CPS or been through foster system because, again, they're just a high-risk kid, right? They've been through some tough things in their life, and that makes them more vulnerable. And so maybe they're at low self-esteem, low self-worth, desire for protection, love, survival. What breaks my heart about some of these is those should be rights to our kids, right? I mean, kids should have love, protection, survival. But because so many don't, that's where the pimps and traffickers are swooping in and saying, let me provide that for you, right? They're the savior. Anyone know what pimps typically, what girls typically call their pimp? Daddy, right? And so what is that instilling? That's instilling that new family mindset. I am your daddy, I will provide for you, that type of thing. And that's what they're doing. They're brainwashing so many of these young victims into that. A few other places that this is happening, 1 second real quick, and military bases. Military bases, unfortunately, are very high demand areas. We have a team that works down in Bell County, which is the Fort Hood-Killeen area, and they've just been going into that juvenile detention there for a little over a year, and they've already identified 18 victims just in the juvenile detention system. So we do see military bases, and in addition, even more girls who we worked with up in North Texas who have told us they've been sold in the military bases. So that's another common area, and also truck stops are a common area, and the high demand fire that this happens with.
How many of the pimps actually get their little victims started on drugs to keep them in line and keep them in business?
Yeah, 80% at least. A very, very high percentage of them will use drugs as a means. They can use it as a means of recruitment, because if they can get them hooked on drugs, they got to keep them coming back, right? Or they use it, or they'll use it as a means of control, where they've got them, they'll hook them on drugs. Now they have to keep coming back, or help them continue to perform.
Are these military-dependent children you're talking about?
No, these are the buyers. A lot of military personnel are buyers of victims.
They are.
They're the demand, yes. And we hear this straight from the mouths of the victims that we work with, and the cases that we worked with. Up in Fort Worth, actually, I'll tell you, one of the cases that we worked was a Fort Worth man who had just finished 2 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, come back home, and he ended up luring a girl into his car outside of Ridgemar Mall in Fort Worth. And the way he did it was he told her, she was looking for a ride, and he drives up, and it was raining, and so she was a little bit troubled, and he says, hey, you want a ride? And she was a little bit standoffish at first, but he reached back and he had his uniform in the back seat, and he pulled it out, and this was his line. He said, I just got done serving a few tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. If I can serve my country, don't you think I can protect you? And he ended up trafficking her. One of the toughest stories we've heard too. So yeah, they are a demand. They're part of the client and the demand side.
My question was going to be, what is the profile of the John? What's the age?
Right.
What's the ethnic?
Good question.
The background, the income.
Yep.
What profile does he fit?
I do have good information on that, solid information on profile of buyers. First of all, more traffickers and pimps are being arrested than buyers and John's buyers. Now we can, as I tell you profile, you'll start to understand as to why that is. But we do need to begin to increase our laws when it comes to the Johns and the buyers, because that's where we're going to see the biggest difference, right? At the end of the day, it's a supply and demand issue. With Johns, every year there is a National Day of John Arrests across the United States. It's cross-sector partners of FBI, Homeland Security, local law enforcement all come together one big day that they focus at least on the National Day of John Arrests. And last year they arrested over 500 Johns. 47% of them had a college degree, and 53% of them were married. The majority are middle-class, white-collar males, but not all males. Some are female, and the majority are white, but not all. Not all. I don't have a percentage off the top of my head. I do know it's over 50%, but it depends on the area again, because we know that pimps. There are pimps and his groups that span the scale of the socioeconomic scale. So there are either in lower income areas where you can get what others call a prostitute for a lower amount, and there are pimps who work in the high-rise hotels in downtown Dallas or in San Antonio or Austin who have a higher clientele, right? So we see it span the spectrum, but I'll tell you, it gives you an idea when you say 47% had their college degree, who we could potentially be talking about. We do see white-collar jobs being a predominant area of the buyers that the buyers are in. So that gives you a scale of them. Yeah, go ahead.
At the end of the day, what do I tell my nieces, nephews, teen, youth, anybody that I'm coming in contact with to be aware and not get caught up in it? What do I say to them?
Yeah, so the biggest thing you can do is the open line of communication, honestly, because it's about who's talking to them and it's about the relationships that they're making, whether it be online, at the mall, at school even, because there are recruiters in schools. And so it's about the fact that they could trust you to come to you if there's someone that they're talking to that they feel uneasy about. It's also, we talk to youth, to parents about knowing what social media accounts that youth have, having access to them, talking to them about be safe online. Do not accept because your younger kids will understand what I'm saying. It might not, many of you may not have an Instagram account, but our kids live in the day and age of social media, right? They're all on their smartphones and their iPads, and they have all these accounts that a lot of parents don't know about. And so it's about knowing exactly what social media sites that they're on, knowing their profiles, telling them, keep it private, keep their Twitter profile private, all of these, because social media is just one of the biggest ways that the luring can happen in the recruiting. And so talk to them about social media, how to keep themselves safe, keeping things on private, not accepting friends if they don't know who they are. A lot of times, we were talking to a dad one day, and we asked him, does your daughter have a social media account, an Instagram account? And he says, yeah, I don't really know how to look at it, but I know she does. And so we pulled it up with him, and we were like, how many followers do you think she has? And I think she was 11, right? And he's like, I don't know, maybe 20 or something. And this 11-year-old had over 1,000 followers. And he started to look through them, and he's like, I don't even know who these people are. And they're beginning, and so that is one of the easiest things you can talk to about young people, or with young people, is how to keep themselves safe online, because it is one of the easiest places that predators can go and begin friending them and grooming them, as we say.
Okay, that was the online portion. What about this face-to-face thing?
Yeah, the face-to-face thing is, stranger danger is still something that we need to discuss, right, with our kids. A lot of kids that we talk to, they'll tell us, they rode home from school with someone, a friend of a friend, right? So they really didn't know who that was, but someone was taking them home. They got in the car with someone they didn't know. That's the bottom line. They can't do that. They can't spend the night anywhere that you have a background check that family. I mean, it sounds silly, but it really is important because we've had cases where someone finally went and spent the night with a friend. Parents finally let them go, and they didn't know the parents that well, and that was the end of that. She got drugged over there and began to get sold. So it's tough because it paints this picture like you just want to lock your kids up or lock your grandkids up and not let them go anywhere. But that's why when we're talking to parents, our biggest stressor is be open, establish an open line communication where they feel comfortable coming to you when something seems off. Has anyone talked to you that you feel uncomfortable? They asked you to do something that made you feel uncomfortable. Simple questions like that can go a long way at helping them understand. Tattoos are another big sign. If I want to talk about signs to look for, most victims are tattooed by their pimp. We see barcodes, cash money symbols, the tattoo that says daddy, right? Because that's who they call it, or the pimp's name. And so just when we're talking to first responders, we're training them what to look for. That's one of the things that you can watch for as far as signs.
Where would we look for that tattoo? Arms, legs, neck?
Anywhere. It could be anywhere, yeah. We've seen them all over. Actually, we had a girl who, her pimp's name was Ricky, and it was tattooed on the inside of her lip, right here. So, yeah, it's a great opening question when we're talking to first responders, because one of the things that when we're talking to maybe educators or people who may come across victims is they're not going to identify themselves as a victim. That because of the psychological manipulation involved, that's just something that they won't do. So you don't ask them, do you have a pimp, or are you a trafficking victim? That's not going to get you far. But you start out by building a trust and asking them some questions, and it could be, hey, I like that tattoo, tell me about it, because people like to tell stories about the tattoos. It's usually a story. So that could be an open question if you did ever suspect a victim. And I'll cover that real quick. If you do ever suspect a victim, because we have heard cases here in the San Angelo area, the biggest piece of information is don't approach them, don't try to convince them to get out, unless you're a first responder and you had a right in that situation. Because, like I said, these guys are making upwards, could be making quite a bit, hundreds of thousands of dollars on one victim. So you're just talking about making a big dent in their pocket if you approach them. So contact law enforcement, call us. I've got my card here for you guys. Call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. You Google that and it pops up right away, and report the tip.
I would suggest that the name of your organization, Traffic 911, be modified in some way, because I don't think it's descriptive enough. This is just my personal opinion.
Sure.
When I hear Traffic 911, I don't know if you're talking about automobile traffic.
Right.
Whatever. I think the 911 and the traffic is okay, but you need to put, again, my opinion, something there to really tell what you're all about.
We are working on that with our board of directors right now, so that's right on point. Thank you for that. Our board of directors is discussing some different things because we're about to partner with another organization. Back in the back.
A couple of years ago, we went to Las Vegas for my husband's medical convention, and I was walking down the strip, and about every 50 feet, somebody approached me with a card saying, 45 minutes, we can get you an escorter. I mean, I'm a woman, and these people are pressing this on me. I thought I got mad at one woman, and I yelled at her, I said, this is just wicked. But are those people who were from this kind of?
A lot of them are. We partner with a lot of organizations out of the Las Vegas area who work on helping young or women, girls get out of the sex trade out down there, and a lot of them are being controlled. And when they're being controlled, or there's money or profit that they're not keeping, that's trafficking. So yeah, a lot of them are. before I end and I can answer some questions at the end, I just want to, I'll tell you guys a little bit more about Traffic 911. So we operate off of a three-pronged strategy of prevention, rescue, and restoration. So on the prevention side, man, wouldn't we rather prevent this from happening than have to restore them once this has happened? Because that part is tough work. So the prevention side is like I spoke about, going into schools, educating people about their online activity, and just giving awareness messages such as this are big. Last year we reached over 12,000 people with a prevention message, and that included about 4,000 youth. And so with rescue, again, we're not grabbing kids off the street, but we partner with law enforcement with rescues through our work in juvenile detention centers across the state, and also we have internet surveillance teams. All volunteers who get trained. Internet surveillance is all women, and they are looking for these young people on ads online and submitting those lead reports over to law enforcement. Last year we had over 70 rescues through those two-pronged strategies, those outreaches that we did, and reached over about 4,000 first responders with trainings. We include that in rescue because once we train first responders, educators, counselors, law enforcement, that kind of thing, they're making rescues. You know, they're identifying victims and calling us, and so that's a big deal. And then on the restoration side, we have a safe home for these victims where we help them get restored. It's long term, and we reached over 30 girls last year through either the safe home or outpatient services. And this year, just so you know, we are moving our safe home and a little bit closer to the North Texas area because our location has just kind of been a problem for us with some certain staffing needs. And so we're in the process right now of moving our safe home a little bit more to the North Texas, still a secluded area, but in the North Texas area, and so continue to be in prayer for our team with that. We are a privately funded nonprofit organization out of Dallas, and so would always appreciate your prayers and support with the work that we're doing. And so you guys have been so gracious, and I will be here if you have any other questions. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but yeah, can I answer a couple more questions, or?
Go ahead. They're
Sure.
$5 a piece, but go ahead.
Oh, I like that. Go ahead.
If we took this information to our school counselors, would there be something available for if they, like just one?
Sure, we can set up, actually, there is an ISD just east of here. Is it West? No, it's not West. Wall. I am doing a training in Wall County, or Wall ISD next month for their teacher in service. And so you guys could get hooked up with them, or if you guys want, you're in Wall?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Well, I may come down and train you then. I think it's in August. So, yeah, definitely.
But like to do just assembly thing with the kids.
Oh, okay.
That
Well, you know,
maybe they'll do that.
yes, maybe they'll do that. And email me, because we can talk about that for sure. All right. Well, thank you all so much.